In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.
The current United States immigration policy has been one of the most divisive and complicated national policies in American history. Pro and con public debate and protests have divided this country in much the same manner as the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. Today on our program, we have two very passionate spokesmen on this hot-button issue. Dr. James Monceau Saucedo, who is the director of the Multicultural Center at California State University, Long Beach, and Armando Vasquez Ramos, who is the coordinator of the California-Mexico Project. Welcome to our program, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Two old friends,
Indeed.
and we're going to cut up about this policy the United States has in terms of immigration. And I want to challenge you guys a couple of times in terms of this policy. Let's take a look. There are some myths, Armando and James, about immigration in the United States, that the current immigrant population is taking the jobs from the current low-income Americans. Is that a myth, James, or is that true?
Well, that's typical rhetoric of fear-mongering. It's always been in the entire history. By the way, there's no time in American history that we've had a coherent immigration policy. So the idea that this is new, I would challenge that. I would say this is not new. Look at the 19th century. Look at every immigrant group that's come here, whether from Europe or from Asia or from Mexico. They have been demonized in the same way. That's one of the oldest chestnuts used, and just all the changes is the cultural group you're using it against.
And this has been a worldwide view. Not just the United States. All of the countries, when they have had new immigrants, Armando, have demonized or attempted to demonize. Yet this population is needed. Any population that comes to a country economically is needed. Is that true?
Absolutely. And I think to add to what James has just stated, we have a history of anti-immigrant.
Yes.
You mean the United States?
The United States. So without going into what's happening today worldwide, which is a very similar paradigm, what we're looking at here is another cycle of what has happened since the founding days of our nation. What is uniquely different in terms of how European groups were discriminated, were exploited. When we're talking about Italians or Irish or Polish or whatever European immigrant population, they differed in terms of color. And they blended into that whole concept of the melting pot. That applies to white Americans. It does not apply to people of color. Whether they're the ancestors of African Americans that were brought here by force as slaves, or in our case, Latinos, Mexicans in particular, that were the dwellers of this land, along with the American Indian, were not only stripped of their land, but also were systematically exterminated. We're talking about genocide.
Yes.
So I think that it begs the question, what happens for 100 years since emancipation and what culminates with a civil rights movement that you and I were a part of in the 50s and the 60s, and that we assume had eliminated this history of violence and racism and discrimination. What we're seeing today is an awakening of folks that have always had that racism, and generations that have followed, that have been submerged since the 60s and the 70s, but that attain a mouthpiece in the form of Trump.
I see you nodding with in agreement.
Because what we're seeing is there's simply permission to say what you already believed but had suppressed. And I think there was a general naivete. We have a black president. As if that changed the root system of racism that has been institutionalized and systemic from all our history. And there was, so I find it very different. I like the word crisis. It's a Greek word, that really means turning point. I was agreeing with you, Armando, earlier when we were talking that a crisis is a positive thing because it clarifies decisions that must be made. The challenge is to make that decision in a direction that is supportive of a new national identity.
Do you see that happening in the United States?
I see that potential in this crisis.
There's no evidence of that. Did you see that lately at all?
Well, I think we're seeing when people see the destruction of families, to see something they've never seen before. It's like watching the civil rights on TV, and they're seeing children with attack dogs. Now they're seeing an immigration policy that is brutal, callous, that is creating trauma for children, that has no relationship to a policy. That's a decision that had nothing to do with policy. It has to do with a meanness of spirit. And that's clarifying. We need to see that. In other words, I'd rather a racist, for example, be bald-faced racist than a racist that smiles and stabs me in the back.
Another myth, gentlemen, that we see is that illegal immigrants that come into the country is draining the economy of health services because they have to go to, there's no preventative service, they have to go to the emergency ward. They're draining the economy of some things that the native citizens could be benefiting from. Is that a myth as well, Armando?
Yeah, it's a total myth, and it's part of this spin in a racist campaign that starts with Trump declaring that Mexico sends criminals, rapists, murderers. And what was the dog whistle for that base that he has targeted and continues to speak to, which is your extreme right-wing racist. There's no other way to look at it. Now, let me also make the following observation. We have now entered a period that is not only during Trump, it's also Obama. During Obama's administration, there was almost 3 million immigrants deported. 96% of those were Latinos. There's something wrong with that. And it was a systematic targeting of deportations by the Obama administration because he wanted to seem hardline. He wanted to bring Republicans to the table and negotiate immigration reform.
Was he successful in doing that?
Absolutely not.
No. But let me back up too, even in the phrasing of the question. Human beings are not illegal by birth. The fact that we create a term, illegal alien,
Yeah, that term.
pre-shapes your ability to see. If you said undocumented worker,
Is that a better term?
well, they're coming to work to have a better life. But the moment I use, the only time I refer to you as a criminal term, it erases the possibility of me seeing your humanity or even understanding it's a family seeking a better life, who are hardworking and honest. But if you have at the top someone saying rapists and criminals instead of hardworking and honest, well, you have, it's shaped in our language of immigration, just the very phraseology.
Armando.
It's dehumanizing, but let me expand on that a little bit more. Fundamentally, what we're going through is another cycle in U.S. history with folks that have always hated immigrants. What we're looking at now, in the aftermath of the Obama administration, given this massive deportation that I mentioned, what we have also caused is the exile into Mexico and Latin and Central America of more than 800,000 U.S. citizen children that were born and forced into exile with the deportation of their parents. That's an issue today that is off the headlines, and there is no concern with a violation of human rights, of children's rights, and certainly
Well, who should be-
citizenship, constitutional rights of a U.S. citizen.
Who should be calling the task of a policy that's so divisive and dehumanizing? What apparatus does this country have to call the task of accountability?
We are at a standstill because we have total control of government. All three branches of government are controlled by the same party, the same right-wing mentality. So Congress is totally unresponsive. The Supreme Court is about to become overloaded with conservatives, more like zealots. The administration will not change in 2 more years, even if there's a change in the control of Congress in November. The bottom line here is that we're incapable of bringing to a court the case of these U.S. citizen children that are stuck in hell in Mexico.
You're painting he is painting a pretty bleak picture, James.
Well, this is back to crisis, though. What it's doing is clarifying what we are and what we're doing. Does the nation want this to be the nation? In other words, it takes the vagueness out. And what we're seeing, and I think, again, it's like we don't have healthy venues in the nation where, aside from politics, that's not the voice of our neighborhoods. That's not the voice of our neighbors. We've let sort of media conglomerates shape everything, and we're not hearing from people. You know, you lose the election by losing a popular vote, but you would never know that the popular vote didn't vote in this president.
So what are you saying? With all this multimedia outlets that we have in this country, you still are saying that immigrants don't have a voice, and those who are advocating for immigrants don't have a voice. Is that what we're saying?
And I think that the fact is that media plays to ratings. Media plays to whatever is the most profitable bottom line. Now, let me get back to the question about health services and how immigrants are perceived to abuse. Immigrants are not eligible for health services. And no immigrant has ever drawn from the system more than they put in.
Yes.
Otherwise, immigrants would not be attracted by a magnet of employers that want to pay cheap labor. Now, are they taking away jobs from Americans?
That is what is being said.
Absolutely not, because Americans are unwilling to do the jobs that these young people, predominantly, are willing to do. And I would say that the worst fear that this is responding to, number one, taking back America was a racist reaction to a black man being elected our president. But the other, the anti-immigrant mood, comes from 2 decades ago when philosophers like Mr. Huntington, Harvard philosopher, who produced this idea that Latinos were the worst element to fear, worse than Middle Easterns, because of our potential growth into a separate society. I don't blame them. The fact is that Latinos have grown into a 60 million population in
this
the
country.
US, in this country. So we are threatening that way, but we're going back to the difference is that we are not white. And otherwise, this immigrant cycle is no different than any previous cycle. It's productive, it creates wealth, and they are the future of our retirement, Earl. They're going to sustain our Social Security.
Before you get started, we got to take a break.
Okay.
But I want you to pick up on your point. But I also, in the second segment, guys, I want to talk. Well, then what would be a good national policy on immigration? Let's talk about that. Let's put that on the table.
Sure.
But hold your point. I know you're going to respond to something, Armando.
Okay.
We're going to be right back with these two gentlemen talking about the national immigration policy of this country after these messages.
In a democracy, citizens need to be informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.
Welcome back. We're visiting with two proponents of the change, at least in American perception of immigrants, James Saucedo and Armando Vasquez Ramos. We're talking about this immigration policy to the United States of America, and I want to get into that in terms of what some policy changes that can be made in that respect. But James, you were going to make a point about the future.
Yes,
about the
vision imminent
yes.
generational voice that is just emerging right now. When you had mentioned in your opener about a galvanized America around an issue like Vietnam, this is the issue that will galvanize a new generation. They do not think the way Congress thinks. They are not coming from an old racist Jim Crow mindset. They grew up in a globalized society. They crisscross culture, ethnicity, and religion with ease. They find themselves allies to any number of groups. They will be not only voting, they will become the leaders we're voting for. And I think one of the things people act as if this old guard is going to continue. It will not.
Well, now, the old guard might be dying off because of age, but do we see young Americans who are very conservative about immigration policy still existing?
Of course. Though that doesn't, what changes has to do with a synergy of thought, with how do you engage that conservative view, as you had mentioned earlier, in a civil way. Divisiveness comes with incivility. I don't care how well we believe what we believe, there should be a way for us to understand how and why we believe it.
That's right.
And from there, options open. But we're in a transition where anger and violence and knee-jerk response goes viral before any fact-checking, any evidence, any context.
So you condemn what you don't know.
That's
one
happens,
of the worst,
right?
Yes.
What you're programmed to condemn,
Yes.
what you're programmed to believe. And quite frankly, I'm pleased with the transformation that is happening. Not that I'm happy because we're suffering through it,
Yes.
but I'm happy that this will also change the nation. This will also pressure younger generations to take the leadership. Let me make this point.
Okay.
I am very disappointed. I am totally beyond belief that almost 2 years since this nightmare began, there's no uprising. There's really no response from young people, from churches, from unions, from educators like ourselves. There is no leadership coming from young people in the universities as we were part of in the 60s and the 70s.
Why is that, you think?
I think that is part of the numbing of this now a process through media and the distraction of electronic devices.
Well, here
Well,
we have...
but one of the things is in the university setting, which I think can be a preview of positive movement for the nation, our own campus at Cal State Long Beach. So you have a Latina president, a Muslim vice president. You know, you have an ease of leadership, and they're doing social justice on a campus level. That's going to start magnifying beyond a campus. Others going to say, we like the way that campus gets along. We like the way they work together. Why can't we do that? Or they're becoming more thoughtful about how do they project their own dissent. Is it counterproductive because it's just angry and I think we're in where it's tumultuous,
Okay.
but it's a turning point. That's how we turn, is through tumult. It's not through ease.
Armando, you are the director of ethnic studies in the Long Beach, or ethnic studies programs in the Long Beach Unified School District. What are you trying to do? And I wanted to ask you the same question with the Multicultural Center at Cal State Long Beach. What are you trying to do with ethnic studies with the schools?
Let me clarify that, because I'm not employed by the school district. I'm still a professor part-time, retired from the university, but I created this program 3 years ago to enable us to teach ethnic studies college credit courses from Cal State Long Beach to high school students.
How's that going?
In 6 different high schools in the district. Fantastic. We started with only 1 class at El Rancho Unified, and Long Beach Unified came in big with a commitment of 12 classes every semester, and I just brought in the Norwalk La Mirada School District with 3 additional classes. We're teaching at 10 different high schools, 17 classes every Saturday from 9 to 12, and it's a phenomenal opportunity to teach about what we learned, what we created 50 years ago in the form of ethnic studies, history and culture about American Indians, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Chicano Latinos. So it's a wonderful opportunity to discover how these young people are hungry and are so capable of analyzing the hunger that they have for knowledge about themselves and to interact with the others, to understand better their differences, but appreciate what makes them a unique part of the mosaic of our U.S. society.
See, and that's exactly part of this movement. That helps to re-nourish and empower a new generation who can understand the social justice victories of their own past, who can see and find an identity that is dynamic and forward-moving. So I'm the founding director of the Multicultural Center, which has been open for 26 years. But I'm the first director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs, which is just its 4th year, which is a good example of now what we did at the Multicultural Center as a root system has branched so that it's university-wide. We now support all the 6 student cultural resource centers that had been on campus for 30 years, but never were part of strategic planning, never had staff or support. Now we're starting our 4th year where their vision, we co-create with them and support it. And we're seeing cultural competency training and workshops that we provide to faculty and staff. We're seeing what we've never seen on the campus before. And it's taking that model in a way, but make it campus-wide. And that creates an empowered student who cannot be, as Brother Minister Malcolm X said, won't be bamboozled by these sound bites, and just will be able to use critical thinking as empowerment of authentic voice.
Okay. Now, on the short run, gentlemen, we mentioned what's going to happen in the long run, perhaps. What types of policy changes need to be made in the short term in this national immigration policy? Would you speak to that, and then we'll let James?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the first change has to be in the House of Representatives and possibly in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate, during this year's elections. If there is no change in the control of the legislative power by the Republicans that are totally locked in step with the Trump administration, then there will be no change of any immigration policies whatsoever. I believe that once there's at least one of the 2 houses in Democratic hands, that you can begin a process of proposing true legislation that can be negotiated, even if the Senate remains a Republican-controlled House. Bottom line, I don't think that anything can happen with the type of racism and the mentality of folks from the White House, as well as the leadership of the U.S. Senate and U.S. House of Representatives. And I think that has to be the first step before we're
So we're talking about an electoral process where...
Absolutely, and that has to start in November of this year.
James?
But one of the things, we need to start with DACA and face it, and because even in Republican circles, that group are not criminals, right? They are the embodiment of working for an American dream in a way that has produced professionals and have been here for generations. That can be the opening of, that voice needs to be reheard. Who are all of these people and what are they doing? They're contributing to society. They are helping to energize our campuses as professionals, and it's a group that defies the easy rhetoric that paints a single picture. So that would be something that needs to be truly addressed first, I think, in a way, because it's almost a bridge point. It can help people see a different humanity within an immigrant population.
Okay, so you two gentlemen deal with populations of young people across ethnic boundaries. And what we're seeing on television now, Armando, is people shouting at one another who deeply disagree over points of view, over policy, over occurrences. And you have influence and or authority over, and I use the word authority loosely, but over young people who may disagree with you or with themselves. How do we teach young people to respect another person's viewpoint and to understand it? First you, Armando, and then
I think it all comes down to education. That's why teaching about ethnic studies in the high schools is so fundamentally appropriate today, given the hate coming out of the White House, given the polarization that we are facing throughout the country. Now, how do we get people to understand and appreciate and accept each other's different point of view and racism? That's a key question. We need to understand how racism comes from the home, how the racism is passed down through generations. And the only way to break it down is in the classroom, is through, frankly, even gatherings like we organized back in the 60s against the Vietnam War, teachings, bringing speakers that are on one hand controversial, but not provocateurs, bringing about a dialogue in after a presentation of
so should we
substance.
shut down a very conservative viewpoint speaker coming to a university that has been invited by an organization in university? Should we shut them down?
Well,
Say, no, you can't come.
No, you can't. That is counterproductive on every level. The best protest to a controversial speaker on a campus would be an empty auditorium. And to have, at the same time that they're speaking, teach-ins available to those who want to
So you're
actually learn
saying
about the project.
if a very conservative speaker comes to been invited by the university,
Yes.
don't show up. Don't come.
I'm saying that students have the empowered free speech to exercise themselves, and that can be a different response. That speaker wants mobs of people yelling at them. That is the game they play. That's the strategy. They will not return to an empty auditorium. Thank you very much.
And that's exactly what we did a few years ago at Cal State Long Beach, when there was a Nazi legislator from the San Diego area that was creating havoc, going to different campuses, and he would be supported by these thugs that would go to campuses looking for headlines through violence.
Yes.
At Cal State Long Beach, we arranged for a debate with Enrique Morones, who's the head of the Border Angels. And what Enrique did, and in a coordinated effort, he started the debate by exposing the racist background of this individual. I wouldn't even mention his name. And at that point, he led a walkout of the entire auditorium. And we left these knuckleheads on the stage with not more than 10 or 15 people. And so I think that it depends on how you handle it. I personally believe that the administration has a responsibility to screen and to ban anyone who is already intending to create violence and conflict, not with an intellectual point of view, because that's how you also eliminate the possibility for this to go out of hand.
We're out of time, fellas. You get the last quick comment.
And it's a positive one. But the answer, the civil rights movement had a moral compass of nonviolence and civility. We've allowed the civil rights movement to not be passed to another generation. They don't know that Dr. King says our goal with an opponent is not to humiliate or undermine them. It's to understand their view and even make friends of them. That is the high moral compass of the civil rights movement. Ethnic studies will help them relearn what these movements were about.
That's right.
And their behavior had the highest of ideals, and I think that can energize a new generation.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for old friends coming and talking about this. I would urge you to tell your students to watch this television program so they can decipher themselves some of the truisms that came out of this. James Saucedo, thank you so much for coming. Armando Vasquez Ramos, thank you so much for coming on Conversations with Erroll Parker. We hope that you have benefited from these conversations. We want to know what you think. We'll be right back next week with an exciting guest on this program. See you later.
In a democracy, citizens need to be informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.